Alright, this next part can be very tricky, putting the bolt back in. The M1A's bolt goes in about kind of like the way it came out, so you got to kind of turn it at an angle like this. Pretty much just keep riding it like this until it goes back in there eventually. It'll catch eventually. There it goes. There it went. Okay. Now you push it back to about right there. Let me wipe this grease off my fingers because I just recently did a full maintenance job on my M1A and re-greased the receiver. Okay, so you push the bolt to back about right there. Alright, so you got the bolt right there. You take your op rod and you line the end of the op rod up to that op rod guide up there under the barrel. And you take that notch right here. There's a notch on the back of the charging handle, the same one you line up with that notch under the windage knob. You line it back up right there, and then you wiggle it a little bit until you hear it click. Did you hear it click? Now your bolt and op rod and charging handle are all back in the rail, and your bolt is back in correctly. Alright, you got your bolt and op rod and charging handle back in. Now you got to put your recoil spring and spring guide back in. And that can be kind of a pain too because of this nuisance little roll pin up here. See? That dude likes to get in your way putting that spring guide back in. So that's why I've got this ink pen here, because if he starts acting up I can kind of force him up out of the way. Alright, so same thing as I did before, kind of put myself up against the barrel so this receiver back here isn't rocking and rolling. Take your spring guide and you stick it back down in the spring. Alright, and then you take the spring, you put it in your op rod. See, I'm trying to do this so where you can all see. And then you pull this dude back to right there. See, and I'll move the camera over. Zoom in. Alright, you bring your op rod back to right there. And then you pull this roll pin up. And you put it back down. See, you didn't fight me that time. But sometimes that roll pin right there can be very bothersome. And sometimes I've gotten it to where this wasn't down all the way and this part of it was still sticking up a little bit, like this didn't go all the way down. So when I went to put the stock back on, the stock wouldn't go back on, and I'd be scratching my head as to what was going wrong, and I'd look and see that this roll pin hadn't flushed with the spring guide completely. It can be very bothersome and a pain in the butt. Alright, so now you got your barrel to action. You set it right here in your lap again. Again, gotta do this in my lap because, you know, my scope. Take your stock, and now you want to line up the cap right here. Close up here, the cap here, the stock ferrule with this stock ferrule. You gotta make sure that that lip on the stock ferrule or cap right here goes over the stock ferrule on the stock itself. So, take your action. Let's see, I orient it like this. There we go. Put that cap right there and bring it down into the stock. Now, there is a thing you need to keep in mind here when you put your trigger group back in. There's also two lugs back here. See, I'll bring the stock back up like so. See those two lugs there? Right there. You gotta make sure those fit inside that stock where they need to go. Alright, there's something you need to know on the trigger group. and I made sure I reinstated this on my first ever, basic field strip and reassembly video. There is a notch here on your trigger guard. Right there, that little bump right there. It's a rail. So you can kind of see there where I've taken it in and out a lot. You've got to line this notch up with one inside, one of those rails inside the receiver. I'll show you. See, there's those two lugs I was telling you about. You got to line them up with the stock. And there's that dreaded notch there for the trigger group. That has got to line up with the notch and rail on your trigger group. They got them made up right there. The receiver and the trigger group got them made up right there in that notch. I emphasize on that right there in the reassembly so much. I did it in the original video when this was just an iron sight only gun. I'm doing it again in this video because there's going to be new people that may see this for the first time. And this may be the first, ever reassembly, disassembly of an M1A video they've ever watched. So I'm reiterating the point. You got to line those two up. See, I got to feel around. Right there. And then you take your trigger group and you press it in. Alright, got it back together, got your trigger group in. Do a quick function check. Okay, the bolt rides smooth, everything's in there just fine. Squeeze the trigger, make sure the hammer goes down. Click. Click. Alright, everything's good. Safety goes back. My dog's barking, he don't know what this is. Poor feller. And that is the basic reassembly and disassembly of the M1A. Alright, that is the basic reassembly and disassembly of the M1A rifle. And the reason I emphasize so much on the rail part of it is because when I first bought this rifle and I took it apart very first time ever, and I couldn't take the bolt out, of course, but I could take the trigger group out. I didn't know that rail was there. So when I was putting it back together, that rail, it was real smooth then. It still is now, but it, you kind of got to get it to go up in there, convince it. It's pretty tight. But back when I did it, I got it in that rail, that trigger group in that rail, and my finger got caught between the stock and this metal part right here of the trigger group. And it pinched right there on my finger, and I had a blood blister right there on my right index finger for like a couple months afterwards, and that hurt like a son of a bitch. I will tell you that right now, I'm not going to lie. So that is why I emphasize that, because I don't want somebody who's new to the rifle make the same mistake I did and, pinch the hell out of their finger. Because, to somebody who's new, who may not be used to these M1As, or, have much of a, a favoritism to them like I do, that may turn them off to it. They may be like, well, that gun pinched the fire out of me when I took it apart. Just that stuff, kind of like that. Try to prevent people from getting hurt on their guns. Because I've had a lot of guns, and I do have a lot of guns that will bite and pinch you, and this is just one of them. But, I just reiterate that point, that those rails are there, and you got to be mindful of them. So that way, maybe somebody who was in my boat when they first bought it. Because, I think I was the only one who ever mentioned that rail was there. All the takedown videos I ever watched up to that point before I bought my M1A never mentioned that there was a rail there in those receiver lugs and that trigger group that you had to be mindful of. So, I figured I'd take the initiative and mention that it's there. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed this takedown video of the M1A. I've done one on the AR-15 and I did one on this gun too. But I just figured I'd update it and redo it for M1A with a rifle scope on. Well, anyway, this has been Plisken by 51mm. Subscribe, rate, and comment. Check out my other videos if you want. I'm also on MeWe and the M1A forums, M14 forums, BitChute, all that. And I'll see you all in the next video.